This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What the hell is going on?
What's really going on?
We said, what the hell happened?
You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
They see what's going on. I don't know what's going on. What is going on?
We must find out what is going on.
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
And I'm Mark Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast, What the Hell is Going On in England?
What the hell is going on is the British have a new piece of legislation which has been called the Banter Bill. And what it does is, so imagine if you were, you're an American and you're in a bar and you are talking about the border disaster that Joe Biden unleashed on America. And you're saying he let in 12 million illegal migrants into this country and they're criminals and they're coming from insane asylums and they're wreaking havoc on our country. And we gotta kick these people out. And there's a immigrant who's working there and overhears that and is offended. In America, tough luck. That's free speech. We got the First Amendment and you can say whatever the hell you want. Under this Banter Bill, if you did the same thing in England, the guy could sue his employer for discrimination for allowing that to happen in his pub. So if you're talking about, men and women's sports and you say in an American bar and you say, we got a UPenn, they ought to have to post the definition of a woman on their website because you can't become a woman if you're a man. And there's a trans person working in the pub. Tough luck. In Britain, they can sue. I mean, this is insanity. It's coming on top of, it's just the latest in the examples of suppression of free speech in our cousin country, Great Britain. The British police, this is a stunning statistic. In 2023, British police made 12,183 arrests under laws that make it illegal to say something grossly offensive or share content that is indecent, obscene, or menacing in character on social media. That is 33 arrests a day in Britain. We're not talking about the Soviet Union. We're not talking about Putin's Russia. We're not talking about any other authoritarian country in the world. We're talking about in London. What the hell is going on, Danny?
So I want everybody to hear the language of the bill because you and I both worked on Capitol Hill, Mark. You were obviously our spokesman. For those of us who were in the business of drafting legislation, you need to write good law. One of the things I teach my students at Georgetown as we look at the trajectory of Iran-related legislation is the difference between the bills that were written in 1992 and the bills that were written in the 2000s, because the bills that were written in the 90s weren't good. They were vague. They enabled the administration to evade them. And now, in that context, I want folks to hear the text of part of this bill. Harassment by third parties. In Section 40 of the Equality Act of 2010, employees and applicants harassment, parenthetical, after subsection 1, insert 1A. An employer, A, must not permit a third party to harass a person, B, who is an employee of A. Next section. For the purposes of subsection A permits a third party to harass B only if the third party harasses B in the course of B's employment by A and failed to take all reasonable steps to prevent the third party from doing so. In this section, third party means a person other than A or an employee of A. Everybody in the UK has focused on the pub, right? Because if you are an employer, A, and you have an employee, B, and the employee hears something or somebody hears something that is offensive, you are liable. I don't understand how people can work on the subway, the tube, because every offensive conversation is in the hearing of a conductor who could be offended and then hold the London tube system liable. This is, I'm going to use bad language here, this is crazy ass shit. This is the kind of thing that if George Orwell were writing it, he would not have been able to think up. And before we turn to our guest, I want to focus on one other thing as well. And that is that, and our guest really highlights this, this is a meeting of the minds of Muslim extremists, anti-Semites, far left woke crazies, far left union crazies, and others. This is the happy marriage of all of these groups. And increasingly what we're seeing in Europe is that these groups are working together to bind the people of Europe in these kinds of straitjackets so that they no longer have the freedoms that they supposedly enjoyed after 1945.
So let me read you some legislative language that was exquisitely written in contrast to that, and which I think that the British people ought to maybe revisit. The First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. That is legislative language of a form.
That's good.
That makes all of these laws that the British are passing. We should, yeah, exactly. We should, maybe folks in Britain, if you're our listeners in Britain, this is why we overthrew the tyranny of George III. Because that language there would make every single one of these laws that the British are putting, the Supreme Court would throw it out and declare it unconstitutional. The Islamophobia law, the banter bill, all of these things would be declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. And I would venture to say long before the Trump nominees on the Supreme Court ascended, the pre-Trump Supreme Court would throw all these laws out. The idea that you can arrest somebody for a social media post is insanity. The idea that you can be sued because somebody said something offensive in your pub is insanity. This is why we had our revolution. This is why we're about to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States, what they call the semi-quincentennial, starting next year. This is a moment for us to reflect on how wise our founding fathers were to break the ties that bound us to George III and establish a constitution that makes all of this impossible in America for all our flaws.
So I think we should probably talk to our friends in Britain and see whether they're prepared to do that. We had Dominic Green on to talk to us about these grooming gangs that Keir Starmer thought he should protect in the UK, and now he's come to talk to us about
Careful, Danny, you're going to get arrested.
The outlawing of banter, exactly. Dominic is a fellow at the Royal Historical Society. He's a Wall Street Journal contributor, a Washington Examiner columnist. He was previously a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute and editor-in-chief of The Spectator's U.S. edition. He is the author of 5 books about British history and society.
Here's our interview. Dom, welcome back to the pod.
Great to be here, Mark. Thank you.
We're so happy to have you, and you've written a wonderful piece in the Free Press. Britain's war on free speech comes for the pub. You've written about this new banter bill, which is the latest assault on free speech in Britain. Tell us what's going on.
Well, I should begin by saying all of this, it sounds like a joke, but it isn't. It's very serious. Nothing could be more British than going to the pub, having a chat with friends, discussing politics, events of the day. And yet, under a bill which is now in the Houses of Parliament, the publican, your host, could be prosecuted if one of his staff overhears you saying something that they don't like. All kinds of rights are, of course, already protected in British law, but this would extend it effectively to making any proprietor responsible for anything which is said on the premises. And apart from knowing how that could be enforced, if it is enforced, it means a severe restriction of free speech.
So, Dom, to me, this sounds like something out of George Orwell, or maybe even sort of a satire by Evelyn Waugh, something like that. I really want to get into how this has happened. But before, let's just talk a little bit more about how this particular bill came about and what the other straws in the wind were along the way. This woman who posted on Twitter and then deleted and is now in prison, et cetera, et cetera. Give everybody the full nightmarish picture.
Right, well, this bill has worried economists and business owners because it puts a whole new set of obligations on employers, which are bound to cost them. The British economy has lately logged 2 months of negative growth, very much stagnant. The hospitality sector, which is particularly important in the economy, is doing particularly badly. So this is like kicking the horse when it's down economically. It fits the general pattern of governments increasing the bureaucratic and regulatory workload. Free speech advocates, of course, are greatly troubled because they point out this is only the latest, as you say, in a sequence of shifts which are gradually tightening the ratchet on free speech in Britain. It goes back to pressure put on media, admittedly after the phone hacking scandals. It includes the tightening of an application of hate speech laws of a kind which, Americans will know exist on campuses, but very rarely elsewhere. It includes the creation, admittedly, by the Conservative government, the previous government, of something called a non-hate crime incident. And if you'd like Orwellian, how about this? If you publish something, say in a newspaper or even on Twitter, that somebody doesn't like, the police will come to your house and say that you've offended someone. They won't say who that person is or what it actually was that offended them. And they will warn you that you've committed an offence that's not quite a crime, but it's not quite a not crime. In other words, you're on their list. And that list can be consulted by potential employers when they run background checks. So merely for annoying someone, your chances of getting a better job or a mortgage even can be badly affected. Thousands of these have been given out and still are being given out, despite the fact that the government claims otherwise. There is also an Islamophobia bill in the offing. If you believe that Islamophobia, as usually defined, is a real thing, and I would say as it's usually defined it isn't, it's a political instrument usually used to stop people talking about Islam and Muslims in Western societies, then that will be a further restriction upon free speech. And of course, what's the one place where traditionally you could actually gather and speak your mind? I'm not talking about the Houses of Parliament, where free speech has been enshrined since the 14th century. I'm talking about the pub, where you could speak your mind long before and long since. So this is really reaching into the core of English life, and it is an attack on the core values of the people of England.
So, Dominic, I don't quite understand why it is that when you post on Facebook about something generic, let's say, immigration from everywhere to the UK has to end, the police come to your door. But when a band at Glastonbury chants death, death to the IDF, and demonstrators in the UK say kill all the Jews, the investigations have serially been dropped, including the one into the Glastonbury band that lost their visa to come to the United States because of their hate speech. Help me understand the
incredibly named kneecap.
Yes.
As well, yeah, don't forget that.
Who kneecap themselves.
What it is that the state is rewarding its preferred classes. It's basically like an upgraded version of the way that autocratic governments like to say, I hate to use the parallel because we're not there yet, but say the Soviet Union and its satellite states had such a thing as preferred classes, and classes which were there certainly to be hated, if not to be rendered defunct, to have their power broken. And the British state and both major parties, Labour and Conservatives, have drifted into this situation. It is astonishing, and it's happened over a period of decades since 1997, when the Labour government of Tony Blair started to rearrange the furniture of the Constitution, started bringing in European-style understandings of human rights. The Conservatives brought in an Equality Act, which again was closer to the European Union's definition of these things than the traditional British one. Now, speech, as you know, is extremely free in the United States. It's always been less free in Britain, for one reason being not just that people were deferential, but also because it was custom. It preceded the law anyway. People always had this attitude long before the Bill of Rights was written. And gradually, however, our political class, which wanted to be part of the European club, in the way that, say, many American liberals would like to think of themselves as Canadians and would say they had more in common with Canada or Scandinavia than they do with those awful rednecks down in Kentucky and Texas and all the other places, right? It's a similar thing. They wanted to be fancy and upgraded, and so they took on this legal culture from Europe, which has no real historical basis in Britain. And of course, like bankruptcy, it goes slowly and then suddenly. Some laws are passed, daily life doesn't change. Then suddenly, 3 decades later, there's a copper on your doorstep saying that you've said the wrong thing. Or you're trying to run a pub and already in the red, and then your staff are suing you because one of your, drinkers has said, as last week 63% of the British said, that there has been too much immigration. That is an insane situation, and we have arrived at it by degrees, largely largely because people had their eye off the ball, and largely because why do they think they would have needed to watch it? Because you'd think that these things are so secure, so much because they're a part of your assumptions and your everyday life. Why would you think that your government would turn against you? I was, living in the US during the Biden years. I think we see similar tendencies across the board in Western societies. In Britain, I think the slippage has been very fast, as I said, because they took on a European attitude. Now, whatever people say now, Europe is not the home of democracy. Europe is the home of at best, enlightened despotism and dictatorships and so on. Stable democracy did not come to Western Europe until after 1945, at the sharp end of an American rifle. And of course, it didn't come to Eastern Europe until after 1989. When it comes to freedom, you should think of the Europeans as an emerging economy. Britain, on the other hand, has a totally different tradition. But as I said, and I hate to use this word, our ruling class, or our elites as we call them, have moved the goalposts, as we say. They have changed the purpose of the government and tried to change our manners. But you can't change the manners of the people of the British Isles. I mean, I would extend that, of course. Famously, Freud said the only people that were immune to psychoanalysis, that there was no point in putting them on the couch, were the Irish. There is a sort of belligerence about the people of the British Isles. They won't ultimately be told what to do. This brings discredit upon the state. It brings discredit upon the government and the lawyers who run it. And it discredits the traditions of the British people. There seems to be an assumption among our rulers that unless we're gagged all the time, we're going to do a racism every time we discuss the political issues of the day. And that's absurd, I think.
So I want to drill down into what this actually means for our listeners here in the United States to understand it, because, you look at the polls and we've had sort of an anti-woke revolution here in the United States where people are losing their fear of cancellation, right? And speaking out about things that they were self-censoring because of, social constraints, right? So polls are showing that in the United States, 8 in 10 Americans want to deport all the illegal immigrants who came here under Biden. And you're seeing pushback on this idea of men playing in women's sports. So if you're in a bar in the United States and you're saying, Biden is a disaster, we got to deport all these illegals who came into our country, they're ruining America. Or you're saying, it's ridiculous that men can play in women's sports and, there's no such thing as a trans woman. You're either a man or a woman. And you can say that because you're protected by the First Amendment. In Britain, if you're in a pub and there's a migrant or a trans person, under this law, they could sue their employer for that conversation. Is that correct?
That is correct. And it's not clear to me whether you'd be able, also, if you weren't in one of the protected categories, if you're not the migrant overhearing people talking about immigration, or the transvestite hearing someone talking about trans rights, whether in fact you could take offence on behalf of somebody else, which after all is one of the hallmarks of our age, is large crowds of people in social media getting massively offended on things that they have no direct stake in. It is nutty. What we have here, we talk about a two-tier justice system where the law is applied selectively. And this is a very good example of it. If you were going to run a two-tier system, it would make sense to favour the majority. And historically, of course, there have been lots of two-tier systems and they have always tended to favour the majority. This is perhaps one of the very few, anyway, two-tier systems which only favours the minority. I mean, they have existed as well, and they have tended to collapse because the winners of that system are massively outnumbered. And especially, it's not going to be sustainable when everybody's vote counts for the same, because democratically, nobody would accept this. So it is giving ammunition to the huge and growing right in Britain, which is quite disorderly now, because the Conservative Party, which was, as I said, was one of the creators, the partners in the creation of this disaster. There are multiple small parties and personality cults on the right in Britain, and no single party. And that's a big difference to the US, say, after 2016, when there was a shift, an insurgency against the Republican Party by its most reliable voters, a candidate who previously hadn't had anything to do with the party, and so on. But this takeover was played out within the party itself. That hasn't happened in Britain. You've had first the breaking away of the nationalists, people like Nigel Farage, who are closer to a European-style new right than the traditional English liberal conservative. And now Now you've had the breakaway of the Labour left, the radical left, a new party of Islamists and sort of Trotskyites, Maoists and tree huggers are breaking away also to form their own left-wing party. So you have a situation also developing, and I think this is a particularly dangerous development, where there is no reliable vehicle for people to express their dissatisfaction democratically. In other words, the man who is leading in the polls in Britain, Nigel Farage, is effectively a one-man band. He's one of 4, counting him, MPs out of 650 in the House of Commons, but he's polling 30% ahead of the government. So that's an individual, not a party, and that's not. There's no guarantee, therefore, that voting for him is going to produce a political programme capable of unwinding all these bad laws that have been passed in recent decades, because it isn't rocket science. You just need to undo the bad laws. So we have a situation where people feel that they are being played for fools. They're being taxed at the highest level since 1947. Borders are apparently unenforceable, and hundreds of illegal immigrants fostered by human trafficking gangs paddling across the English Channel every day, being accommodated in hotels at taxpayers' expense. But any legally operating business is being ground down by massive taxation, and no political vehicle exists with which to express your desire for change. Usually, this results in rioting. And of course, we've seen that last year. And we're seeing protests now, as I speak, at hotels which are being used to house migrants, which I believe, should the good weather hold, will probably break out across the country and turn, as these things do, from protests to riots. And that's already started to happen. So I think Britain is going to enter a 1970s-like period of civil disorder, violence, and also bankruptcy. I should have mentioned that. The debt to GDP ratio is pretty much 100%. Future yields on gilts are higher now than they were when Liz Truss was booted out, because they had reached that kind of level. So in other words, the economy is on borrowed time, the people have had enough, and the government and police appear to be using the last of their strength in insulting the loyal citizens and taxpayers. This is a recipe for real disorder, I think.
No, I completely agree with you. And I want to talk more about the politics. And I also want to understand better about the riots and the civil disorder that's going on. But I want to dive into this remaining question about exactly what it is that gets you in trouble. So a little boy was investigated in the schoolyard for calling another kid a retard. There were 12,183 arrests in 2023. This poor woman who has ended up being the poster child, who's now doing 31 months in prison, was sentenced to more time than people who have been involved in pedophilia. This is a government that stars people that we talked to you about this on our last podcast on the similar topic, that were involved with letting grooming gangs that committed tens of thousands of trafficking and rape crimes against minor children, and yet you don't really know, right? Because grossly offensive doesn't have any meaning. Indecent, obscene, or menacing character. What the fuck are they talking about?
Oh, they mean that if your feelings are hurt, and that's the thing. This is bad law, apart from its motivations, which are unpleasant. It's bad law. It's vague. It can be applied by anyone. And that, of course, favours the wealthy and the powerful over the poorer and the weak. I would like to assure your listeners that we haven't gone completely insane and read the numbers backwards. It's true. Lucy Connolly, a mother, was given 31 months and is still in prison for a single tweet which she deleted during the disorder following a multiple murder of children by a mad knife man. A couple of weeks ago, an illegal immigrant who had raped an underage girl received 14 months. In other words, for raping children in Britain, you get less than for using hurty words. This is not some kind of polemical point. That's just the mathematical numbers of it. The idea that you could send a child home from school, as happened last week, because, the children were asked to celebrate their cultures. And she had come wearing a Union Jack dress, with the flag on it, like one of the Spice Girls, schoolchild, and was going to talk about, I don't know what, Paddington Bear, marmalade sandwiches, cricket, or whatever, all the other things, of British culture. And she was, put on the naughty step and then sent home. This is a very telling incident, I think, one among thousands, because it shows that we are run by people who despise their own country. And again, this is not unique to Britain, although self-loathing is a kind of national hobby. You would look at many Democrats in the United States. You look at the extreme edge of the right of the Republican Party these days, and you see the same alienation from your own country, the idea that anywhere is better than where you're from. We're run by these people, and the result is that they pick their targets accordingly, and they indulge certain groups accordingly as well. There are members of the cabinet whose parliamentary majority is in the low hundreds, for instance, the health secretary. The candidate who came second in their seats was not from the Conservative Party, it was usually an independent, usually Muslim candidate. There is a battle going on, in other words, for the Labour Party's survival electorally, and the Labour Party, therefore, is tacking heavily towards pleasing Britain's growing Muslim population in the cities, and also tacking to keep the support of its vestigial support in the trade unions. So a bill like the Banter Bill, which is actually called the Employment Rights Act, that satisfies both the unions and the woke and Muslims and anyone who would like to, who believes in the culture of grievance and the culture of regulation. Well, that's a sweet spot, isn't it? At a time when the economy is collapsing and everyone is at each other's throats. This is one of the ways of keeping their clients happy. And I'm afraid it's an endemic problem in our politics, and what we badly need in Britain, as in many other countries, is a new way of talking about politics and reorienting government back to serving people and giving people what they want, what they're paying for, after all, with their taxes.
So I just want to put these numbers in perspective. So I just looked this up online. According to the UN, there are 2,000 political prisoners in Russia. OVD Info, Russian Human Rights Project, recorded 517 politically motivated criminal prosecutions in Russia in 2023. 817 arrests at rallies and demonstrations across the country in 2023. Freedom House also says nearly 800 defendants faced criminal cases because of anti-war activity. In the same year, British police made 12,183 arrests under the law that makes it illegal to say something grossly offensive. That's a stunning contrast, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, I would say this. I would rather be menaced by the authorities in Britain than in Russia, because in Russia...
That is true.
Because in Russia, they're quite good at it, and in Britain, they're amateurs. The other thing is that my car is less likely to steer itself into a tree if I write about it in
or
Britain.
Or to fall out of a window.
Yeah, exactly, that kind of thing. But, and it is, as they say, a big but, the drift, since when did we compare ourselves, to Russia? Since when was that even a valid standard of comparison? Since when would it have produced the kind of numbers when we would have had to say, okay, this is why it's like Russia and this is why Britain isn't like Russia? That's ridiculous. I mean, I'm not being funny. Wars have been fought over less. You ask most British people and they say we fought the wars of the 20th century so that we didn't get treated like that by the police or the government. It's a disgrace that it's come to it. I've been back in London for about a year, and in that time I've not talked to anybody who defends these kind of laws. I have, however, I think virtually every stranger I've spoken to, and in my line of work, speaking to strangers is of course how you try and gauge public opinion. I haven't met anyone who wasn't outraged, anyone who wasn't cracking up, regardless of whatever social class, also regardless of background. The very large numbers of assimilated immigrants and their children and grandchildren are also shocked at what's taking place around them. This is not a crudely, black versus white issue or something like that. And even I was talking to someone who I suppose you could call a member of the aristocracy, and even they were saying it's got to stop. And when it reaches that high in a society which, as I said, still has a lot of deference, then you know that people are simply not going to have it anymore. They will not wear it. And I suppose they may be more numerous, but they are the weaker party, and it may yet get worse before it gets better. Remember in 2023, when the stabbings happened in Southport before the riots there, Keir Starmer attributed this, and so did his government, and most of the British media as well, to the organised far right. A few months ago, the British police issued their report into the rioting, and they found no evidence of any kind of organised far-right activity behind the protests. These were entirely spontaneous, just as they are entirely spontaneous now in quiet and very pleasant and expensive commuter towns like Epping in Essex outside London, or the market town in Norfolk called Diss, which no one really talks about at all. It's such a nice quiet place. These now have a standoff between the police, the angry residents outside a hotel where migrants are stacked with migrants, some of whom, of course, are working illegally as well. And one of them will have, or more of them, one or more will have assaulted a local child or menaced them, as happened in Dis. This is happening all over the country. It cannot be attributed to the far right. This is the reasonable middle. And the government has made a bad mistake in setting itself against the sensible and decent instincts of the vast majority of people.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm sitting here looking at the research that Kristen compiled for us, and I want to just ask you about, in this context, about the talk of an Islamophobia bill. So let's see. A man was arrested for bringing a satirical cartoon of Hassan Nasrallah to a pro-Palestinian protest in September 24. In May of 25, London police arrested a man for shouting "God bless Israel" and "Am Yisrael Chai" to pro-Palestinian marchers. But this Ethiopian asylum seeker who punched two female police officers and was trying to continue attacking one of them that he had gotten on the ground had a 16-week suspended sentence. A man who was convicted of grooming or molesting a teenage boy, Paul Jones, received a suspended sentence for 18 months. Adnan Khan tried to abduct 10 children for the purposes of sexual abuse and got bail. A Palestinian who posed with guns online and called for the killing of all Jews, a guy named Abu Wadeh, got asylum in the UK, or claimed asylum in the UK. I mean, do they need an Islamophobia bill? It seems that Saudi Arabia is less liberal than the UK when it comes to Muslims committing crimes.
Well, if you talk to people from the Gulf, they will often tell you are storing up a world of trouble by not being more careful about who you allow into your country and how you allow them to behave. All the cases that you described, they went through the courts and a judge made that ruling. We have a rotten judiciary, largely. The judges have become annexed, it seems, to the global human rights business and therefore have divided the world into victims and perpetrators. And in this case, Abu Wadeh, the genocidally minded Palestinian, is somehow more of a victim than the child who is molested, or the policewoman who is beaten, or the little boy who is groomed. Most people, having not completely taken leave of their senses, know which way round this actually is. They know what right and wrong actually are, and they can therefore see that their government is trying to pervert reality when it tells them otherwise. And that's why you get these weirdly nuanced laws such as the Banter Bill or the Islamophobia Bill, which is imminent, which seeks to address one particular situation or create specific, unique rights in law for only one group in the society. These things are done in the same way as you might send out a fire truck, because there is an ongoing panic in government, a recognition, in fact, that they cannot control a massive public disgust at the way the country is being run. And therefore they're trying to fight fires all over the place and becoming increasingly hostile to their own people and increasingly authoritarian. So we are in a gathering cycle, which, as I said, is leading us nowhere good.
Those of us who, of a certain age, or, think of Britain as this country where free speech reigned. You had the Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park where anyone could get up and say anything they wanted to say. I mean, could you get up in Hyde Park and in the Speaker's Corner and say Islam is a religion of violence and there are too many Muslims in our country and our country's being taken over and we need to deport all these people and send them back to Saudi Arabia? Would you be arrested for that? Because it sounds like you would be if you said it on Twitter.
Well, there are lots of clips on social media showing people attempting to discuss the merits and demerits of Islam at Speaker's Corner, being mobbed, being attacked, and so on. Disorder results from what you have said, and even at Speaker's Corner, the police, as they say, will have you. The Public Order Act allows them to do anything to basically restore order. Anything which is, quote, provocative is enough. So therefore, shouting out "God bless Israel" is considered a provocative act if there are enough people within earshot to be offended by it. That is inimical, obviously, to the American understanding of free speech. It's also inimical to the British understanding of these matters. I referred earlier to the difference between custom and law. The idea of free speech in Britain is a custom. It's just a habit. The laws that guarantee it came in later. That custom was refined into a pure principle in the First Amendment. But it's not a custom everywhere, as I said, for instance, in Europe, which, these countries don't have the same traditions of free speech at all. As I described, the governments, both parties, took it upon themselves to shift the law into a more European frame. In other words, we own the rights as the state, and we will give you a few limited rights. And that's, of course, completely different to saying we're the people, this is how we do it, and we want our laws to emerge by customary example. That's common law. That's also the foundation of law in the United States. You work from precedent. So this is an attempt to rewire how people think, in effect, to rewire how they think of their relations to their fellow citizens, how they think of their relations to their government, and how they think about what's acceptable to think because of that. And, it sounds dramatic and it sounds Orwellian, but let's face it, George Orwell was from Britain. There was this tendency, and he did write 1984, not just as a satire on post, 1945 Soviet Europe. He wrote it based on his experience of working for the BBC. So there has always been this tendency, this desire to control what people say. And, there are customary ways of doing it as well as legal ways. In the US, there is a powerful, powerful customary sanction against speaking your mind. Say, in the professional classes, in the workplace, in the universities, there's a great deal of soft social pressure. As they say, don't be inappropriate. That's an example of that. But the effort to turn it into law has failed. Even the universities are now having to admit that hate speech is not a real thing. It does not have a constitutional foundation. Well, because of this different historical legacy in Britain, they've been able to bolt all kinds of stuff onto, the body of the law, and someone is going to have to come and amputate it. And as I said, we will not have a change of government in 2029, and it's not clear whether the alternative is going to be able to get itself into shape by then. From what I do hear, and I've been speaking to people here about this, there is what people are calling the Great Repeal Bill is being prepared by 3 people in a corner office somewhere in London. It's not a major operation like, the Heritage Foundation preparing, an off-the-shelf program. This is 3 people at the moment are drawing up what they propose will be the first moves of a new government in 2029 to erase all of this nonsense from the law books. And if that can be done, then we are starting.
So, Dom, exit question from me, just to come back to where we started. I think that there are people in Washington who think Nigel Farage is the answer to all that ails the UK. Hostile to immigration, hostile to a lot of these free speech restrictions, hostile to a lot of the wokeness that we hate so much in America. But you sound, first of all, 4 seats in Parliament is not exactly an overwhelming platform from which to do this, nor is an occasional article in the Daily Mail. So how does the constituency, the not remaining silent majority, if you want, in the UK, pull together a political movement that actually takes power?
Well, that's difficult, and it happens on 2 levels. As you're saying, on the level of political parties and organisation, the problem is the most charismatic figure, Nigel Farage, who has been on a long, long march to the centre and has gone from being treated as a fascist and a racist to basically being treated as the person who predicted everything and got it right. That Farage is not an institution builder. That same march to the centre is littered with the stories of small parties which were invented for the purpose of the next step, and which collapsed, usually because of some personal infighting. He is a one-man band. He is in this way very much like, say, Berlusconi was in Italy. He's not, in other words, like Donald Trump, who, as I said, created a huge change within the political party. That leaves the Conservative Party, which is universally disgusted. I mean, the whole country hates it. I think their numbers are down to 15-16% or something in some polls. On the other hand, they have no principles, which is what got us into the mess in the first place. And in their history, the Conservative Party have managed to retool themselves and reinvent themselves. They are the most successful party machine in the history of Western democracy. For that reason, they have no morals whatsoever. So they have a wonderful opportunity here to set themselves up for decades more power by showing that lack of principle and now doing all the things they claim to have been about for decades. You could write it on a postcard the manifesto that would win the 2029 elections. And it would be no more mass immigration, deportation of all fraudsters and crooks, deregulation of large parts of the economy, modernising the National Health Service, rebuilding the military, getting the trains to run on time, and stop arresting people for saying stupid things, even if they're stupid. You know, you could write that on a postcard and it would be sufficient to win a colossal majority. But it will require the parties of the right to pull together. The people are already there and are already ahead of them and ready to go. And it remains, look, it's possible that the parties will bungle it. It's possible they won't get a single coalition. It's possible people won't want to join the Conservative Party again. I mean, anything could happen at this point. It's very much in the balance.
So there's a famous joke that Ronald Reagan used to tell about how the difference between the Soviet Union and the United States. And he said, in America, a person can walk into the White House, walk into the Oval Office, stamp his fist on the desk and say, Ronald Reagan, I don't like the way you're running our country. And Gorbachev told him, well, they can do that. You can walk right into the Kremlin, stamp your fist on the Kremlin desk and say, I don't like how Ronald Reagan is running his country. Right? I just saw in our research that in France, a woman was arrested for giving Emmanuel Macron the middle finger when he was passing by at a protest. I mean, France today, it looks like, is a little bit more like the old Soviet Union than America. How is this? I guess we expect this in France on the continent, but we don't expect it in Britain. You're our cousins. It seems like we made the right decision in 1776 because we got a constitution with a First Amendment that protects all of it. None of this that you're describing could happen in America.
You're right. We are cousins, but lately the British state is behaving like some demented great aunt who is, allowing people in to steal the silverware and handing stuff out and can't find her purse. All the children and grandchildren are wondering, what will be left by the time she's gone. The optimist in me says this has happened before. It does happen in countries. There is what Jimmy Carter called malaise in the cycle of political life in all societies, and we're up to our ears in malaise without a cardigan at the moment. Talking of constitutions, as you know, there is no formal constitution in Britain because it developed over a long period of time and there was never any need, therefore, to burn things down and begin again, as happened in the US and
Apparently
in France,
there was.
right? Yeah, there is. I'm not so sure whether the French Revolution was a good idea. I think it's generally turned out to be a disaster in the long term. But the American Revolution was a fantastic one. So it goes to show constitutional government can work. There's been a lot of talk since 1997 and when Tony Blair came in about having a British constitution. I don't see anything wrong with that. And I think the current crisis would be a great opportunity to actually formally write these things down. And then maybe we could have something like the First Amendment that really would establish free speech, this ancient principle. If you look on the House of Commons website, it'll say that in the 1300s, the principle of free speech was established in the House of Commons, even though no one had written it down. And when you're in business and you're doing things on a word and a handshake, sometimes things, you can be exploited. And that's pretty much what has happened to the British people. They were doing things on a word and a handshake with the king in the 1300s, and now they've got a modern state which is chiseled away with its laws and so on, and bureaucracies as well, who write their own laws, as we know, until suddenly we're in a terrible corner where we're going to be prosecuted for complaining about it. But as I said, the optimist in me suggests that when there's a crisis and a breakdown, this forces you to rebuild things. And it forces you to, as the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia did, to seriously think about, okay, what are we going to do from here? What matters and how are we going to secure it in law? So this can be done. We can get rid of these laws. We can make a better constitutional government, even one that has greater free speech. We can even close the BBC. Anything is possible if we're able to organise ourselves, vote, and if we have political parties that are actually willing to act upon their promises. Because every British government that's been elected, lots of them since 2010, every single one promised, for instance, to reduce immigration, especially illegal immigration. And yet every single one presided over the opposite. So no wonder people are furious.
No wonder indeed. Dom, thank you so much for sitting down and explaining this through to us. I think a lot of people won't believe that it has come to such a pass in the UK, but you've been a very rigorous chronicler of the slide into authoritarianism in the UK, and we're really grateful.
Thank you. They haven't arrested me yet, but let's see how it goes.
I was going to say,
Well, hopefully this podcast won't precipitate that.
hopefully.
You'll
Thanks,
regret having
Dan.
joined us.
I must go. I hear the knock at the door now.
Oh no, oh no.
Thanks, Dom. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So Danny, what do you think?
Well, I probably should just start ranting as you advised. So I think it is absolutely remarkable that
Well, it's still legal in America because we're Americans. We got our constitutional protections. We can rant, we can banter as much as we want.
can.
And we can say
We
what
can
the hell we
banter and
want.
rant. Look, it is absolutely remarkable to me that 80 years after World War II, the continent is slipping back towards this kind of authoritarianism. And, look, you can say that it's different, but the reality is that using government in the service of a minority in order to effect outcomes is in fact what a lot of World War II was all about. And yes, they can make the claim that they're answering a serious problem, but it is a problem of their own making, right? It is a problem that has been caused by overwhelming illegal immigration into the UK. It is a problem that has been caused by failure to police immigrants. It is a problem that is caused by a failure to have serious civic education, to share your values, to explain to people that if you come to this country, you have a contract with this country and you must share our values. Because the answer is, what they're telling people is, you need not share our values. You can be a child molester. You can be a rapist. You are a protected person if you are that guy, as long as you are a Muslim. That's insane.
It's also a failure of having a written constitution, which makes all this stuff impossible. Again, 250th anniversary of the American founding, of the Declaration of Independence coming up. We should, as a country, reflect on just how lucky we are that these things can't happen here. Because there's a lot that went wrong under the 4 years of the Biden administration. And there's a lot, we're facing a lot of the same problems that they're doing in Europe in terms of mass illegal immigration into the country. But you know what the great thing about America is? We can push back on it. We can get rid of our government and put in a new one that will do what we want them to do. And we can speak out and say what the hell we want. We can say, in America, the purpose of the First Amendment is to protect offensive speech. That's why we have it. It's like inoffensive speech doesn't need protection. Popular speech doesn't need protection. It's unpopular speech. It's offensive speech sometimes. It's things that the protection we have against all the political correctness and the cancel culture is that we have the right to say whatever the hell we want, even if it's stupid, even if it's dumb, even if some people in the elites think it's offensive. They don't get to police speech, right? And that's what the hallmark of a free society is. And that's what allows us to push back and petition our government and change our government. Britain is losing that. And our European allies are losing that. We can sit here in our fortress America and bemoan what's happening over there. But a lot of Americans died to protect free speech and all the freedoms in Europe. And so I'm offended for them that this kind of assault on freedom and this slip into authoritarianism is taking place because our countrymen gave their lives to the freedom of that continent.
Well, it's true that our countrymen gave their lives. It's also true that a lot of Brits gave their lives, and a lot of our allies gave their lives in that service, and they've forgotten about that pretty darn quickly. I would remind you, Mark, that Syria has a constitution as well. You don't just need a constitution. You need a really good constitution.
The Soviet Union had a constitution too. It was quite democratic, but you need institutions to protect the constitution.
Well, if there's anything that makes you appreciate our founders, this conversation should have been something that makes you realize their brilliance, their wisdom, and yes, their prescience in taking us away from the great British Isles and to a place where we can in fact insult our fellow barmen without fear of imprisonment, because that's what this country's for. Damn it.
Or
Thanks,
I
folks,
can
for
insult
being
Danny on
with
this
us.
podcast.
Yes, you can, and do it every time. You should probably go to jail for it, but we'll have to wait for another day.
Danny would definitely put me in jail for it, but I have the Constitution in my back pocket.
There you go. All right, take care, folks. Thanks for being with us.
See you next week. Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at @dpletka.
And I'm at Mark Thiessen. That's Mark with a C.
Please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.